Welcome everyone to our CB seminar on creating inclusive Sanghas. You know, our BCA temples have successfully been in the United States for well over 100 years. However, with the discrimination faced by Asians and Asian Americans, as well as non-Christian peoples in America, many Americans do not know who or what our Buddhist temples are. In many cases, we have been hidden in plain sight. However, this problem is not a one-sided issue. When individuals come to our temples, how are they treated? Having myself worked with many interfaith groups, I know it's not always comfortable to go to someplace new, such as a temple or a church. It's often difficult to come to even one of our BCA temples, even if you have attended a similar temple in another city. And although many of us like to say, come just as you are, how do we make our temples more welcoming and inclusive? Today's seminar is to help us open discussion on this idea of creating inclusive Sanghas. This seminar came about when we at the Center for Buddhist Education asked the Ministers Association for suggestions as to who or what subjects they felt were important. This morning, Mushim Patricia Ikeda Sensei of the East Bay Meditation Center and Reverend Harry Bridge, current chairperson of the BCA Ministers Association and resident minister of the Oakland Buddhist Temple, will discuss how we can work towards creating inclusive Sanghas. Thank you both for joining us today, and they will introduce themselves also.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be co-presenting with Mushim Sensei. I'll just for myself, I'm Buddhist Church of Oakland resident minister for quite a while, and actually this September will be my 15th year anniversary as a BCA minister, and also chairperson of Ministers Association. I'm half Japanese, half white. I think that that's significant. I wasn't the first. I wanted to be the first, but I wasn't. But I'm in there. And, you know, I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon to have multiracial ministers in BCA. Fortunately, we have a lot more now since I came in. And I'm also very fortunate to have lived in both places in the United States. I was actually born in Japan, but moved to the States when I was 1. But back to Japan when I was 11, back to the States when I was 17. So I've really been back and forth, and so fortunate to experience 2 cultures in that way. So, you know, I used to consider myself half, is how I referred to myself, or maybe half Japanese. That idea comes under criticism sometimes, but, you know, that's how I grew up kind of thinking about it. But I also see myself as biracial, even multiracial. To not limit it to just those 2, but to, you know, recognize the importance of this kind of diversity. And diversity is one of the main things that Mushim and I have collaborated on in the past, and I think we really hold it dear. So we've worked together before. We were co-presenters for Federation of Dharma School Teachers League. Long time, I was going to look up, I don't remember when, it might have even been almost 10 years ago. But I'd like to turn it over to Mushim for just a little bit to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Reverend Harry, and thank everyone. The team that is supporting this Zoom meeting. I see that there are 57 of us together on this Zoom today, and thank you all for taking time out of your weekend to attend. I'll say a few words about the way I self-identify as well, following Reverend Harry. Before that, I want to just add a few words to say that this topic is very meaningful to me, and something that quite a few justice activists in my circles have been speaking about recently is that the need to feel that one belongs in one or more communities is basic to the human being. It's just as basic to us as the need for food and water. It's a form of shelter, I guess. And so there's a lot of wonderful, wonderful community conversations going on about the longing to belong and to feel that one belongs. And as a mindfulness meditation teacher, I love to teach walking meditation in the Thich Nhat Hanh style, where he teaches that with each step, wherever you are, as you place your foot, you can say, I have arrived, one step. The next step, I am home. And so for people who often feel like I'm being excluded, I don't even know if I belong here, and are looking around apprehensively, that ability also to go within and to honor ourselves and say, yes, wherever I am home, is such a basic, I don't know, it's a message of love and spiritual belonging that I hope that we can also impart today. So basically, a few words about myself. My name is Mushim. That's a Korean Zen Buddhist name. Patricia is the name my dad gave me. Ikeda is our family name. And I self-identify as a Sensei, third generation Japanese American. I grew up in Ohio. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am zooming in from, this is my home, from the unceded land of the Lisjan, Lisjan, indigenous people, also known as Oakland, California. A lot of folks in my circles at East Bay Meditation Center, this is kind of our form for the moment. Everything's always evolving, of introducing ourselves, if we'd like to do so. There's always the right to pass, in order to acknowledge the sense of, again, we do want to feel, of course, this is my home. I want to feel I belong. I also want to acknowledge that this house is on land that was tended for and is being tended for thousands of years by the Lisjan people. It's a both and that we'll also be talking about as well. Other than that, I'm delighted to be here and ready to dive into our topic of creating inclusive sanghas, looking at our thoughts and assumptions, which is the topic that is a huge everyday practice for myself. I just want to put that in. And I get so much fun out of it. Sometimes it's embarrassing. Sometimes it's weird. However, it's almost always surprising when I'm able to slow down, look at a thought that's just winging through my mind like a bat just flitting past, and think, wow, wait a minute. Is that even true? And if so, how do I know? So I just want to tell you, it's actually a really fun process once we can get into it. At least I find it so. A little bit about our overview of how we'll be spending our time together. Reverend Harry, can I invite you to announce the agenda? And if we could ask that it be put into the chat, it will be there as well for those of you who are more visual.
Yeah, thank you. We're doing our kind of introduction, and we'd like to introduce kind of the format that we'll be doing. We're going to go over the communication agreements, and then Mushim Sensei and I will both give really brief kind of Dharma talks. And then we want to talk about some skill building in this area, and looking at something called intent versus impact. Then we're going to take a break, and we're going to end the Zoom recording there. So this is being recorded, but it's going to be just Mushim and I for this first section. But then after the break, which is going to be around 11:50, 12 o'clock, we're going to do more interactive stuff, and we'll have ask everyone to kind of journal a little bit, think about some questions. Mushim and I will talk more, and then after that, to have kind of a sharing circle and possibly question and answer. And so for this format, there will be more interaction, but more in the second half, and that will not be recorded, so that you don't have to feel like you're going to be preserved forever on YouTube or whatever. So that's basically our format for today's session.
And we're also going to invite you to do some really brief reflective journaling. So if you like, have your favorite pen and some paper handy, or maybe you're the kind of person who likes to take notes on your phone, but maybe something that you can just put some notes down on might be helpful to our process.
And again, that'll be after a break. So if you're like, no, my pen's in the other room, you can get that later. You don't have to feel like I got to rush and get it now. Although you might want to take notes. So great. So should we go over the communication agreements? We're going to kind of set the container.
Yes.
Right. And so these will be, in a way, these will be more important maybe in the second half, but we want to kind of put them out here now. And the first one is confidentiality. And so these have been put in the chat as well. And so confidentiality, anything that's said here, please don't be repeating what you hear someone else say in other contexts, and also know that stuff that you say won't be expressed in that way.
Yes, and at East Bay Meditation Center, my home temple, what we also say is that confidentiality doesn't mean that you can't speak about what happened here, because of course we want all of the learnings to go out and ripple out. So what it means is that please do not repeat anyone else's story or directly quote them. Reverend Harry and I are exempt from that, and I am misquoted quite a bit, but that's our lot. However, anyone else, that we're going to have some very heart-centered sharing. And as we know, feelings of non-belonging, historically, socially, in the context of what's going on right now, feelings of non-belonging go far more than feelings. They have to do with how we're perceived in our identities, and that can affect our physical safety, certainly our emotional safety, and our political safety as well. So therefore, with confidentiality, please guard other people's privacy as one would wish one's own privacy to be guarded. However, take home all the learnings and share them freely. And please open many respectful discussions. And we'll be going into how really good ways to ask questions too. Thank you. So confidentiality, and that's the way that we help to keep one another safe. The second communication agreement we'll be asking you to please consider is to, if you do in the interactive parts, speak or put something in the chat, please speak truthfully, briefly, because there are 61 of us now together. We'd like to hear as many voices as possible. Speak truthfully, briefly, or write truthfully, briefly, and practice self-focus. This is usually couched as using I statements. And please do not speak for anyone else or any group of people. You are the expert of your own experience. However, it's quite common and well-intentioned for people in an attempt to say, we're a group and we love each other and we're all together, to say, oh, as we all know, well, we all agree that. We certainly all voted this way, or we've all have the same experience of that. And the effect of that is that usually there is diversity in the room, in this case, in the Zoom meeting, and it suppresses it. That again, the need to belong and the need for social harmony, which is very important. Then people who actually don't have that experience, who disagree, who didn't vote that way, remain quiet. And what we're trying to do is to propose that our Sanghas can become incredibly rich learning communities in which we all become more skilled at opening welcomes that allow people to enter our communities as their full selves, and to be with difference. Yeah, so speak truthfully, briefly, and practice a self-focus and I statements. Reverend Harry.
Yeah, I like the next one. Share the air. This is kind of connected to speaking briefly, I guess, in a way. And, you know, that we do want to be able to hear from as many voices as possible. Yeah.
Yes. And it's an art to, especially if there's highly emotional content, which of course belonging usually is, it's an art to really use our mindfulness and to reflect on what is it that I want to communicate to others that comes from my heart, and then also create space for others. So that's 3 out of 5 of this short list. The 4th communication agreement we're proposing to you is to please practice deep listening. And please do not interrupt others. Deep listening includes and goes beyond not interrupting others. Deep listening means that we ground ourselves and we become, as much as possible, very open. Let's put the distractions to the side, if possible, and really listen deeply to the other person in a way in which we're not also practicing what we would say in response to them. So that if Reverend Harry says something about music or something happened, I'm trying to really monitor myself to examine whether I'm thinking, oh yeah, I heard the same musical group and this is what I thought. Or I had a similar experience when I was 5 years old. That thought might come up, and then I'm just going to gently say, thought, I can visit you later, because right now I'm listening to Reverend Harry and I really want to hear what he has to say. So that's deep listening.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think this is, listening is one of my favorite things. Speaking of music, that's, as a musician, that's my favorite thing to do, even while playing, is it's not so much about me, it's listening to everything else. And I think that listening is actually a great metaphor for really a way to be. And it's part of Jodo Shinshu too. And we talk about hearing the Dharma or listening to the Dharma, but this deep hearing the name. So this idea of deep listening, I think, is really, really important. The last one's the big one. It looks so easy. It's okay to make mistakes. Right? This is in a way kind of at the core of a lot of stuff, right? And so to realize that you don't being silent because you fear you're gonna make a mistake isn't necessarily the way to go, right? And that I think interacting is so important, but that with all of these, right? So yeah.
And would you say that's true of music as well, Reverend Harry?
Absolutely. Oh, if you think you're going to somehow get to some state where you won't make mistakes and you'll be perfect, it's never going to happen. You learn by making mistakes. The only way to progress is by getting out there and doing it, right? Realizing I may make mistakes, but also being open to realizing that maybe that was a mistake, right? And so that openness, this is really fantastic. I think, to be honest, sometimes I feel like communication agreements seem like something we have to get through. We got to do these because we got to get through it. We just got to set the rules. Then we'll get to the meat of it. No, this is why it's Mushim Sensei. I learned so much from her each time we interact, and just really, each one of these is a deep teaching in itself. And so we want to take these to heart. We will post them again during the second, after the break, because they will be, that much more important and relevant then. But we really wanted to bring these up.
Thank you, Reverend Harry. Yes, and actually, I got the yes and. I forgot to tell you, apparently the drummer Questlove has put out a book on, I guess, on jazz, or maybe his own story. And he said that in jazz, what the musicians are doing in their ensemble work is saying, yes, and musically.
Mhm.
So it's this way of affirming, you've said something, you have a way of being. So I say, yes, 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 Reverend Harry. And then my mushimness comes in, so that we don't have to feel we're canceling one another out if we disagree or if we're different, because that's what makes it so great to be us. As one marital counselor I know said to a married couple, if you were exactly like yourself, you actually wouldn't need to like one another. You wouldn't need to be married. You need to be different. And it's good, difficult, and good. So thank you, everyone. And yes, as Reverend Harry has said, and also at East Bay Meditation Center, these agreements are embedded in a slightly longer list, and we call them agreements for multicultural interactions. We don't call them communication agreements. For multicultural interactions, and what that means is we are agreeing to a set of practices, not rules. These are ongoing, evolving life practices for ways of being. We're evolving ways of being that possibly, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, Reverend Harry and everyone, and say, possibly human beings, we just haven't done this. Because as far as I know, we evolved that we were limited in our geographical area. Some clans and groups were quite cut off. I mean, look at Japan for many years. It just, when I got my DNA tested, as far as I know, I'm purely of Japanese descent, so I didn't even get it tested because I thought probably so boring. I got it tested, totally boring. It's all Japanese. Because, Japan was fairly closed. And so the way that human beings evolved was that we had our sense of belonging by saying, well, I know I come from such and such a family and such an area and such a lineage. And this is who this is who I am, and this is who we are. And then as we begin to be with people now globally from all over the world, and there's translation that's available, we're with so much difference. And in a place like Oakland, this is a very, very diverse city, which I love. Then learning how we can be together in multicultural interactions is probably, to my mind, one of the most foundational things that we can be doing now to move forward together as Sanghas and as people and as beings on this planet. All right, so I get very enthusiastic. So that's my little soapbox, because
Oh, it's great.
agreements are so wonderful. And so Reverend Harry and I would like to pause now. And Reverend Harry, could you just maybe briefly just state the 5 agreements, and then we'll just ask you if you can all make a commitment.
So, right. So the this confidentiality, to speak truthfully, briefly, and practice self-focus, to share the air, to practice deep listening, and realizing that it's okay to make mistakes.
Thank you. We're going to pause mindfully for a moment and ask, and this is a real question, there's 62 of us here. Is there anyone in this meeting who cannot agree to these? You have such a strong objection that you can't agree to at least try these on. This is a real question, so I'm going to pause and ask our moderators to look for any raised hands. Okay, thank you. Reverend Harry and I now have, oh, go ahead, Reverend Harry.
The only thing, we have deactivated the chat for this section. We've just experienced the chat as being potentially disruptive during presentations. It will be turned on for the second half. But for now, we have deactivated it. And if you do have an issue, like there's something wrong with the screen or something, you can chat to the Zoom manager, Koichi. And so we just wanted to point that out for this first half. We're going to have the chat deactivated.
Thank you. We've talked about how important Reverend Harry and I both feel this is to us, all of us as human beings, for us to consider how important it is for us as human beings, not only human beings, as living beings on the planet. And one might say, well, what does this have to do with Dharma? So we just have prepared some very brief Dharma talks. In my case, what I'd like to do is share with you one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite texts. And that's an early text many of you may know called the Dhammapada, Dhammapada. There are many translations. This text is super old. And this one is by the scholar, practitioner, and teacher Gil Fronsdal. And that will be put into the chat as well. So what I'd like you to do is relax, if you like, and listen to this quote. This is said to be something that the historical Buddha might have said around 2,500 years ago, translated into English. This is from chapter 3, translated in this translation, The Mind. And these are 3 verses. The restless, agitated mind, hard to protect, hard to control. The sage makes straight as a Fletcher the shaft of an arrow. Like a fish out of water, thrown on dry ground, this mind thrashes about, trying to escape Mara's command. Mara is the deceiver. The mind hard to control, flighty, alighting where it wishes, one does well to tame. The disciplined mind brings happiness.
Thank you. Yeah. This seminar, when we talked originally, trying to generate ideas, this was one thing that popped out, and it hadn't struck me the way it did when you read it to me at that time. And so it's really an interesting passage. One thing that I think is great about our interactions is that, I'm Jodo Shinshu. It's the kind of Buddhism that I've been practicing for 25 years, or investigating at the very least for 25 years, and living, I hope. And Mushim is coming from other perspectives, right? Not as a committed Jodo Shinshu practitioner, but that's one of the issues I think we face being Jodo Shinshu in our time, and especially when so many Buddhisms are available to us. And so that's always something that's going through my mind is, how does this fit with Jodo Shinshu? And so just really briefly, some of these statements, like the sage makes straight, that makes the mind straight, like it's the shaft of an arrow, right? To discipline one's mind, tame the mind. And that, I feel, is not my understanding of the Jodo Shinshu path of practice. And yet, still so much to learn from here, right? And very Shinshu in a way, to see the mind as a fish flopping on the ground, right? I think that's a fantastic metaphor that can be applied to a Jodo Shinshu perspective and our understanding. Thinking this morning, and that so much of life is basically self and other, not so much other power and self power, which is how we might, as Jodo Shinshu people, we might think, oh, is that what you're talking about? Not in this case. I'm talking about myself and my interactions with others, right? And if we can break it down that way, in so many ways. And so, thinking about awareness, it could be awareness of myself, my feelings, but it's also awareness of others and their feelings, awareness of my impact on others. Right? And so and also that it's a two-way street. I can think about, well, that person did this to me. And that's another Dhammapada verse, right? He stuck me, he robbed me, right? And realizing, oh, they did that to me. It was awful. So often I find, or I hate when they do that. But I find but what about me? Do I do that? Oh no, I do. Is that why it bugs me so much? Right? So that thinking about myself and then thinking about others, but often I think about others and I'm judging others and I'm complaining about others. But if I turn that back on myself, I often find that in myself as well. Right? And so to me, this self and other dynamic is so important. I was thinking about one example of Jodo Shinshu, I think, is, one thing we're taught is dana, to be helpful and generous and kind and giving. But what if I'm trying to do that and I think I'm doing that, but actually it's ego motivated, right? I think that we would want to realize that. We wouldn't want to think we're doing dana when we're actually not. Similarly, what if I don't want to be racist, but I actually am? Right? Or I have racist thoughts, right? And I think even worse, what if I consider myself anti-racist, but I'm actually racist? That would be awful, right? And I would think that if I want to be anti-racist, I would want not to be racist myself, right? And so, trying to treat others in a certain way with dana as anti-racist, and yet also having an awareness of myself. So again, this self and other. Speaking from Shinshu perspective, a lot of it is because we're often not in control of our thoughts and actions. Life often doesn't go the way we want. And so that self-reflection, so important. So realizing I'm often not in control, and yet don't want to indulge in that behavior either. And so, one thing I'm going to use the word butthead, okay? And I don't want to offend anybody, but this is a milder word than other words I've used when I've been coming up with this, right? Part, I think, of Shinshu is to realize it's okay to be a butthead, but don't be a butthead, right? So this kind of both and, that similar maybe to that yes and, right? But this both, yes, it's okay to realize it's okay to make mistakes, but I don't want to make those mistakes again and again and again. I don't want to indulge in that. So it's kind of a knife edge. It's really, I think the middle way permeates Jodo Shinshu in a way like this. And so, middle way between worrying about myself, worrying about others, between complaining about others, being aware of myself, between it's okay to make mistakes and to have these thoughts, and yet also don't want to indulge. So those are just some of my thoughts, kind of setting up my thoughts about this seminar, and also kind of addressing this issue of Shinshu, but also Buddhist, both and maybe, right? That a lot of these concepts just I'm already seeing this morning just kind of rippling out. Oh, it's there too. Oh, here too. So just really wonderful for me, certainly. And so I think we'd like to move to the skill building component of our seminar today.
Yes, thank you. So briefly, we have a little over 10 minutes. Thank you, Reverend Harry. We want to just talk a little bit about a really basic foundational skill for creating more inclusive Sanghas. And that is learning the skill. To use this skill, first we need to have a mindset and we need to have an intention. And then we need to practice, and then we need to be okay with making mistakes and learn how to apologize and say, I'm very sorry that I hurt you, and I'm going to try never to do that again. So we give ourselves room to make mistakes, because otherwise we can never learn. It is painful. Yes, sorry about that. Can't get around that. It's painful, and it's worth it. It's totally worth it, because it's through this skill that we can our world becomes larger and richer and more beautiful, speaking from personal experience. So what we want to do is to just point briefly towards a skill to create space for people, other people to share things with us about themselves without having to feel they're battling assumptions we've made about them and thereby boxing them in. We can learn to be open to surprise. And basically the skill is that we're presenting you with and pointing to is shifting on one hand. So shifting, we're going to shift. Here's our first place. We're going to shift from here, from statements and questions based on assumptions. So this is where we might be. We want to shift over to here, which is being able to ask respectful, open questions. Now, this is counterintuitive because once again, in order to create a feeling of social glue and oh, we're getting along and safety with one another, the usual social mechanism for me as for everyone else is to assess someone, even very briefly, and say, well, we're both women, so we must know this. Or in the case of Reverend Harry, if I just met him, heard how, to my ear, he speaks American English, maybe know that he has played electric bass guitar in a rock band, and to say, oh, that Reverend Harry, yeah, he and I are so alike because, yeah, we're Japanese Americans, so we're down with certain things in a certain way. And then I might go on in that way. And what would happen, Reverend Harry, if I said to you, yeah, we're both Japanese Americans, so of course we know that.
And it's happened to me before, so I know how it feels. But
so how does it feel to you? How does that land on you?
Yeah, I don't. It ticks me off sometimes, to be honest. And I really don't identify as Japanese American at all, personally. And we mentioned self-identification earlier on. And, I used to identify as half Japanese, I mentioned, and then biracial, but Hapa for a while. But, recently I've kind of been thinking of myself as multiracial, right? Not Japanese American.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Reverend Harry. And something that Reverend Harry and I would also like to propose to you and ask you to all to consider is that, and things change. He just said that he used to self-identify at one point as biracial, and then there's Hapa, which was a term much in use in my circles at some point, and then that changed quite a while ago. And so currently multiracial, and probably that language is going to change as well. Again, not to offend anyone. Again, to state historically, this is what we can look at how language evolves and how we feel about ourselves, how we look at ourselves, and also how others look at us in terms of perceived identity or identity. My parents, who were Nisei, second generation Japanese Americans, my dad from Indiana, my mom from Hawaii, they would, without any kind of bad feeling, refer to themselves as Orientals in the 50s and the 60s. Since that time, that has become, unless you're talking about a rug for a person, that has become a pejorative term, something that's very distasteful and is an insult. So how we want to be seen and known in our true selves doesn't always remain the same. Usually it changes. So therefore, we need to be open to constant learning. It's like continuing education. We need to be open to continuing education without getting credits. The credit that we get is that people will feel so much better when they're with us. They'll know that we're trying to be safer, we're trying to be open, and we really want to know who you are and how you want to be seen. and to respect you in the way that you want to be respected, not in the way I think you want to be respected. I don't get to legislate that. And that includes respecting if I ask a question about how you self-identify, and if you say, that's not something I really want to talk about now, no problem. No problem at all. We can just roll right on. And so there's a way of asking open questions, and those of you who are therapists or who have been in therapy will probably recognize this, and that is leaning forward maybe a little bit and showing interest in what the other person is saying or might say, and instead of saying a question which already dictates the answer. Two good ways of asking open questions are, what has your experience been with that? And also we need body language and tone of voice so that it's actually open to whatever the other person has to say. What's your experience been with that? And how do you feel about this or that? So those are two good forms that we might consider. Reverend Harry, you had spoken about when we did the prep work of the way that you like to respectfully inquire about people's experience. Would you share more with us about that?
Right. It's not even how I like to do it, it's how I would like to do it, because I'm not good at it. It's just part of the way I am or have been is I'm not good at asking questions of other people. And I think part of it is because I've been afraid. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to, insult this person or something. So just keep quiet. But what I would like to be able to say is, what's your story? I want to know more about your story. I want to know more of who you are. Right. And so, thinking about, I'd really like to learn more of your story, whether it's now or later. And that's one of the great things about Sangha. It's not a one-time meeting, right? That if we're able to be, to become part of the same community, you get to meet this person again and again, right? And it can take time. But that's really what I always, as I'm sitting at lunch with a family that I've only met one or two of the people after a memorial service or something, it's like, I want to ask all these people all these questions. And I just kind of sit there. I hope somebody says something about themselves so I learn. So that's something I'm still working on, is how to learn more about. And I think that this is a key component for all of us, right? In our Sanghas. Isn't that part of Sangha? Getting to know each other, right? And allowing other people to be themselves as I'm hopefully allowed to be myself.
Yes, and once again, part of this is it's fun. It's so much fun. It is. It's
just hanging out, right?
Yes, hanging out. And if we wanted only to be with people like ourselves, we could just be with ourselves. As the therapist had said, I don't have to go to the bother of going out and meeting anyone or Zooming with them. I could just talk to myself. But no, I do want to know about your story and your story. In the few minutes that we have left, we want to also introduce a second key concept. The first was learning to ask open questions and deeply listen. The second is what's called intent versus impact. And could I ask that one of our moderators please put that into the chat? Intent versus impact. What this points to is that really, there are occasionally people with very evil intentions to harm others. For most of us, not so. We actually are good people. We have good intentions. We do. We want to be, we want to try to be kind and welcoming. We certainly don't want to go around hurting people's feelings or saying racist or misogynist things or ageist things. We even selfishly, if it would just save us from being, from making someone else upset with us and improve social harmony. So for the most part, we can assume many people, not all, but many are of good intent. However, again, it's that shift. We can concentrate on, there's the intention And then if there's something that is not skillfully communicated, or there's a lack of skillful communication, we might shift to see that there can be a negative impact in how something lands on another person. So we're just going to role play this for a second. And I'm going to say, Reverend Harry, here's an article about Japanese art. You're Japanese, so I thought you'd be really interested in it. And I'm thinking, I'm giving myself bonus points. I've learned he doesn't self-identify as Japanese American. He's Japanese. All right, I've nailed it. So I'm going to show him how much I like him. Reverend Harry, you want to look at this article about Japanese art?
Not really. Why
Really?
would I be interested in that? Although I might say, oh, sure. And that's my thought in my head, actually, not what I would say.
But you're thinking that, that's your
I'm thinking it,
experience. Yeah, but Reverend Harry, you're Japanese. Why aren't you interested in my article?
Once again, I don't identify as Japanese American, so, right? Yeah.
No, this is about Japanese art.
Yeah, I'm not actually that interested in art either. Why would you think that?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I've learned something about you. So you can see my intention there is to connect in a very friendly way to Reverend Harry. It's not connecting with him at all because I'm operating on assumptions. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go on break? Maybe something about gender identity assumptions, Reverend Harry?
It's a different world than even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I was very interesting to come in because, like I say, 15 years ago, I became a minister and was surprised to see a lot of gender roles still held much more strongly in the temple community than in my general community, than what I kind of saw, right? And I feel like in the past, what maybe upsets some people, they want to say, I want a time when we know men are men and women are women, right? We want to know where everyone stands. That's why I say whatever I feel like. I don't care if I offend anybody, right? But I want things, I want things to go back to when I could look at someone and I knew, right? And those days are gone, I hope anyway, right? Where people have to, I was stunned to learn in my 30s from temple members that they weren't allowed to wear pants in the 50s, right? Women, right? Even in the United States, it wasn't accepted. It was completely unacceptable. There were even official dress codes against it at schools or businesses, right? And so I think that's what maybe some people have, it creates fear in some people, and that fear is whipped up by others. But to me, it's like, let people be themselves and let's enjoy this incredible diversity of possibilities and this multiplicity, and that each person has many multiple aspects too: gender, race, ethnicity, sexual preference, all these different things, and profession, hobbies, everything, right? And those are all these wonderful parts of people. And rather than try to shove people into boxes, to have more openness to this wonderful plurality, maybe we could call it.
Yes, and before we go on break, I just wanted, that was so good, Reverend Harry, just to add, when I did some of my Buddhist training in monastery in the mountains of South Korea in 1987 and 1988. And I had known this before I'd gone because I came through Korean Zen lineages in Canada and in the United States. So I didn't know this. However, I really knew it when I was there. And so the national dish, as many of us know, of Korea is kimchi. However, what many people do not know is that kimchi does not mean the Napa cabbage kind that many of us think is kimchi. My understanding is it simply means a salted pickled vegetable. And there are so many different kinds. So if you're with a Korean, or you are Korean, or you're in Korea, kimchi could mean any one of so many different kinds of pickled vegetables. Some have red pepper, some don't, and they're all very, very distinct, of course, within that culture. So in in the same way, when we lump things together, and as Reverend Harry said, we just feel like, well, we just want some certainty. We want to know, is that person a man? Is that person a woman, a boy, or a girl? Is that a this? Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? We're not creating space. We're closing space down and asking people to fit themselves into boxes, which human experience actually rarely does fit into. Even if it does for a while, it could very well change. Can we be open to change?